A pack could survive famine, raids, even the long winters that broke antlers from elk and patience from kings. But it could not survive a lie about worth. The first lie was always simple, that belonging had to be earned by obedience rather than recognized by truth. Arabella learned that beneath wedding firelight, while the elders held polished bone tablets and spoke of purity, and every wolf she had fed, healed, or defended looked at the ground as if silence were a kind of mercy. It was not mercy. It was permission for cruelty to wear ceremony's face. The night she was meant to be crowned Luna, she stood in ceremonial silk the color of dusk wine, hands trembling above the sacred flame, waiting for the vow cord that would bind her to Alpha Rourke and the Duskwalker throne. Instead, Rourke took one step back, not forward. His voice carried cleanly through the moonlit clearing. Arabella Duskwalker, you are barren of honor, you divide loyalty. You weaken blood. Murmurs rippled through the gathered pack, quick and avid, as if they had been waiting to agree. Her aunt, who had braided moonflowers into Arabella's hair an hour earlier, pressed her mouth thin and did not meet her gaze. Arabella remembered the smell most sharply: pine pitch from the fire, old fur cloaks damp with mist, iron from the knife she had used to cut bread for the feast that no one would now eat. "Say it to my face," she whispered, and her voice came out hoarse, smaller than she wanted. Rourke did not flinch. "You are unfit for Luna. Leave before dawn." An elder lifted a staff and struck the boundary stone 3 times, each blow formal, each blow final. Someone behind Arabella hissed, "Throw her out now!" Hands seized her arms. She fought once, reflex and fury, and earned a hard shove that sent her to her knees at the edge of the clearing. Silk tore. Gravel bit into her palms. By the time they pushed her beyond the boundary markers, the hem of her gown was dark with mud and a thin line of blood from a scraped thigh. She looked back only once. Not one wolf crossed after her. She survived because hunger is a teacher that accepts no excuses. Months later, in the fringe woods between territories, Arabella wore patched leather over the remnants of that silk, now cut into strips that lined a sling for her daughter. She slept in root hollows and disused trapping sheds, traded healing salves for oats, and learned which berry thickets were safe by taste and memory. Her body carried the slow ache of recent birth and relentless vigilance. Milk-heavy soreness, wrists stiff from gripping knife and child at the same time, shoulders that never truly lowered. At moonrise, Era's irises flashed silver for a breath, then faded to storm gray, a secret Arabella hid even from the kindest villagers who left broth on a stump and asked no questions. She had begun to think secrecy might be enough to keep them alive. It was not. On the 7th night after the first frost, the Ash Moon Riders found her near the old border cairns. Their horses wore ash-dyed tack and bone charms that clicked together like teeth. Zephyr Shadowfang's sigil, a black crescent split by a hook, marked each cloak pin. 5 of them fanned out, practiced and patient, hemming her between thorn scrub and riverbank. The lead rider lowered his hood, revealing scalp braids threaded with carved obsidian. "Arabella Duskwalker," he called, smiling without warmth. "By ritual decree of the Ash Moon, you are summoned to surrender the child." Arabella shifted Era higher against her chest, her instincts sharpened until every scent cut sharp as glass. "No." The rider inclined his head as if she had answered correctly on a test. "Then hear the alternatives clearly. Leave all wolf territory before second moonrise and never return, or yield the pup to pure-blood guardians in the fortress. The child will be raised according to doctrine. You will be spared harassment if you comply." Another rider laughed softly. "You should be grateful. Castoffs do not usually receive terms." Arabella's jaw locked so hard it hurt. Era stirred, too warm, a fretful whimper pressing through chapped lips. Fever. Not now. Not while hooves boxed them in and prayer bones clicked like a countdown. The lead rider drew out a scroll tube and shook loose a strip of hide stamped with Zephyr's seal. Sign your consent mark. We can do this gently. Arabella looked from the hide to her daughter's face and felt the tight knot behind her ribs loosen into something colder than fear. If she signed, Era lived in a fortress built on doctrine that called children property. If she refused, they would chase. If she ran, she might die before dawn. I am already outside every wall that ever promised safety, she thought, present and raw and terribly clear. I have no counsel, no title, no witness. I have my hands, my legs, my teeth, my breath. I have my daughter. That is enough to choose. She moved before they expected resolve. One heel slammed into the nearest horse's knee, not to maim, only to startle. The animal reared, its rider cursed, a gap opened. Arabella plunged through it, clutching Era beneath her cloak, and sprinted downslope into alder shadows. Shouts cracked behind her, hooves thundered, then stuttered on wet stone as she cut across the river's edge, where moss slicked every step. Branches whipped her face. Cold mud swallowed her ankle to the calf, released with a sucking pull that nearly stole her boot. Era cried once, high and thin, then fell into frightening silence against Arabella's collarbone. Arabella did not look back. She counted breath like strikes of a hammer. 12, 12, 12. Keep moving. The fringe woods gave way to old military ruins, relics from border wars no one spoke about at feasts. Broken watchtowers leaned like cracked teeth over a ravine. Half-collapsed walls of gray stone caught moonlight in flat, pale plains. Arabella knew of the abandoned outpost only from trader gossip. Haunted, cursed, empty. Empty sounded like mercy. She veered toward it as arrows hissed into tree bark behind her, close enough to shower splinters down her neck. "Stop running!" someone shouted. "Your surrender is guaranteed protection." A second voice answered, "Take the child if she falls." Her lungs burned. Milk leaked warm through her tunic where Era's fevered cheek pressed. She stumbled through a breached gate and into a courtyard littered with rotted shield rims and rust-frozen spearheads. The place smelled of rain trapped in stone and old smoke baked into mortar. She ducked behind a toppled ballista frame and dropped to her knees, curling around Ira, cloak, and body, making a wall. Footsteps entered the gate. Not one set, several. Heavy, unhurried, disciplined. Arabella dragged her knife free. Her hand shook, but the blade did not. "Come closer and I cut anyone who reaches," she said, voice ragged and low. She meant it. She would die with steel in her hand and her daughter beneath her ribs. The footsteps stopped. For one suspended second, only wind moved, slipping through broken arrow slits and setting an old banner chain clinking softly overhead. Then a different scent reached her through rain and dust. Cedar, cold metal, storm rain caught in wool. Not ash moon incense, not river rot. A man stepped from the archway where moonlight broke over the courtyard stones. Tall, broad-shouldered, fur-lined cloak dark with drizzle, a scar pulling white across his cheekbone into his beard. Another mark, older and stranger, curved just above his belt where his tunic gaped at the side, a crescent burn etched into skin. He did not wear Zephyr's sigil. The wolves behind him, 3 in worn armor leathers, held position near the gate with hands visible and blades sheathed. The stranger's gaze took in the scene in a single sweep. Arabella crouched and shaking, knife up, child limp with fever. His expression changed by degrees, ruthless edge receding into focused concern that looked more dangerous for being controlled. "I am Dante Stoneheart," he said, voice rough as gravel, carrying without strain. "You are in Stoneheart Hold territory. Lower the blade. Let me see the child." Arabella gave a broken laugh that bordered on hysteria. Of course. Another alpha with rules. Era made a small sound, barely there, and Arabella's laugh died. Her thoughts ran hot and jagged. If he is theirs, you hand her over and beg. If he is not theirs, you still do not know his price. If you hesitate, fever takes her while you measure pride. Dante took one careful step closer and stopped when Arabella tightened her grip on the knife. He lifted both empty hands, palms out. I will not take her from you by force, he said. But she is burning up. I can help if you let me. Something in his tone, not softness but restraint, cut through the panic. Arabella nodded once. Barely. Dante crouched slowly, movements deliberate enough to follow even through the blur at the edges of her vision. He reached toward Era with 2 fingers first, asking with his body before touching. Arabella's arm jerked on instinct and her hand shot out, catching his wrist hard. The world snapped taut. Pine smoke flooded her lungs, then storm rain, as if she had inhaled 2 seasons at once. Heat raced beneath her skin in a violent rush that made her fingertips go numb. A ringing pulse struck her sternum, steady and immense, like a second heartbeat sinking against her own. Dante inhaled sharply. Gold flared along the crescent scar at his ribs, bright as banked fire dragged into air. His pupils shifted, amber bleeding through the dark, and something ancient looked out through his eyes before he tore his wrist gently from her grasp and stepped back, as if contact had burned him. Arabella stared at him, knife forgotten at her side, panic and longing colliding so hard it hurt. Not him. Not now. Not when everything in me is ruin. Era whimpered between them, and Dante's voice dropped to a whisper that sounded like disbelief and recognition tangled together. Moon above. The word left him like a prayer dragged over broken stone. Arabella heard it and hated the relief that answered in her chest. Prayer meant gods, and gods had watched her be cast out in silk and silence. Yet the pull between them did not care what she believed. It drew tight when Dante moved, eased when he stilled, as though an unseen line had been knotted from sternum to sternum and now tested every breath she took. Behind him, one of the armored wolves shifted his stance. Alpha, he said carefully. Ash Moon riders are circling the outer ridge. Dante did not look away from Arabella. Hold the gate. No pursuit unless they cross stone. The man struck fist to chest and withdrew. Rain began to strike the courtyard in slanted sheets, darkening old bloodstains in the mortar until past wars seemed to wake beneath their feet. Arabella tightened her hold around Era and forced air into her lungs. The ringing in her chest had not faded. It pulsed with a rhythm too large for one body. Dante spoke first, voice low and formal, as if choosing each word against instinct. You felt it. She bared her teeth in something that was not a smile. I felt too much today to sort one nightmare from another. He took that without offense. Water ran from his hairline, cutting silver tracks through dust on his temples. Up close, his age sat in the hard lines around his mouth, rather than in his frame. Strong, controlled, dangerous. The sort of male her old pack would have feared first and negotiated with second. I do not force bond claims, he said. Not by law, not by will. I did not ask for law. Her voice cracked. I asked for my child to stop burning alive in my arms. His jaw tightened at the words. Then let me earn enough trust to help her. Slowly, he lowered to one knee in the mud, putting himself beneath her eye line. Permission to touch the pup, Arabella Duskwalker. Her name in his mouth landed like a hand at her back, steadying and unsettling at once. No mockery, no title stripped from it, just fact. She looked at Era's flushed face, at the tiny fist clenched against her own skin, and then at Dante's open hands. A low thrum built in her chest, warning and wanting tangled together. She nodded once. Dante moved with clinical care. 2 fingers to Era's forehead, then throat, then the soft skin at her wrist. He closed his eyes briefly, scenting, assessing. Arabella watched the old crescent scar at his ribs. The gold glow had dimmed, but faint light still traced the mark beneath wet cloth, like embers refusing to die. "Fever from lung chill and exhaustion," he said. "Not seizure. Her breath is shallow but even. We can pull this down if we act now." He glanced up. Amber had bled into his irises again, the predator surfacing not in hunger but in heightened focus. "I need elderbark, yarrow, clean cloth, and heat. The East Barracks still has an intact hearth." Arabella swallowed. "Why here? Why an abandoned outpost?" "Because exile teaches useful geography." A bitter edge crossed his mouth and was gone. "I have held this ruin as neutral ground for 3 winters. No pack claim, no council interference. Wolves who need a border to breathe come through and leave unseen." The answer was too specific to be a lie made on the spot. She did not lower the knife, but she shifted enough to let him lift Era. The instant his forearms slid beneath the child, the bond snapped bright again. Warmth surged beneath Arabella's skin so quickly her knees weakened. She caught herself on a splintered beam and locked her gaze on Dante's face. He froze with Era against his chest, breath gone hard and shallow. The rain hissed around them. For one suspended heartbeat, everything narrowed to his eyes on hers and the raw recognition in both. Not lust, not triumph. Terror edged with awe, as if they had both stepped onto ice and heard it crack, but not yet broken through. Arabella's thoughts scattered and reformed into one clear refusal. "I am not a prize found in ruin. I am not a bond to be claimed because a godlike symmetry." The next thought came softer and far more dangerous. "But she is warm in his arms, and he is holding her like she is made of law and light." Dante looked away first, jaw flexing. "Inside," he said roughly. "Now." He rose and crossed the courtyard in long, controlled strides. Arabella followed with the knife still drawn, rain needling her scalp through loose hair. They passed beneath a broken lintel and into a narrow hall, where old torch brackets held fresh tallow stubs. Someone had been living here, if not comfortably, then with discipline. Bedrolls were rolled tight. Weapons hung cleaned and oiled. A map table at the far wall was weighted with river stones and charcoal marks. Dante laid Era on a folded cloak near the hearth and barked orders to his men without raising his voice. "Boil water. Strip the east rack for dry timber. Send Corin for healer's satchel from Kashitu. No one enters this room without my leave." One of the wolves, a lean woman with cropped black hair and a scar over one eyebrow, gave Arabella a brief nod before disappearing into the rain. Another set a kettle over flame and retreated to stand at the doorway with deliberate distance, eyes lowered in respect. Arabella noticed because she had forgotten respect could be shown without performance. Dante crouched by the fire and mixed crushed bark with steaming water, his large hands unexpectedly precise. "This will taste vile," he said, glancing at Arabella. "It works anyway." Despite herself, a short, shocked huff escaped her. "That is your healer speech?" "It is the honest version." The corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile. "I left polished comfort to prettier men." He tested the brew on his wrist, then offered the cup to Arabella first. "You give it. She knows your scent better." She knelt and tipped a few drops between Era's lips. The child coughed once, grimaced, swallowed. Relief landed so hard Arabella had to look down to keep from shaking. Dante waited until Era settled, then held out a dry blanket. As their fingers brushed, the bond pulsed again, less violent now but deeper, like roots taking hold in dark soil. Arabella jerked back on instinct. Dante drew his hand away at once. No protest, no claim, only a measured nod that acknowledged both the contact and her boundary. Storm thunder rolled over the outpost near midnight. Era's fever eased in increments, then climbed again when the wind shifted and cold seeped through stone. Dante fed the hearth, adjusted cloths, checked breath and pulse with relentless patience. Arabella sat against the wall with knife across her knees, refusing sleep and losing that battle one breath at a time. When she woke, she was already moving. Dark. Smoke. The wedding fire turning into torches. Hands on her arms. Baron of Honor. Someone reaching for the child's sling at her chest. Arabella surged up with a cry and slashed. Steel rang once against stone. The blade stopped short of Dante's throat by less than a finger's breadth. He had not drawn his own weapon. He had stepped back, hands open, letting her strike empty air rather than meet force with force. At her feet, his sword lay on the floorboards, deliberately placed there, out of his reach. She stared at it, then at him, breath tearing raw from her lungs. "You are in the East Barracks," he said, voice quiet, paced to her panic. "Storm outside. Era asleep by the hearth. You are safe in this room." Her arm trembled so violently she lowered the knife in jerks. Dante did not move closer. He lifted a clay cup from the table with 2 fingers and set it on the floor between them as one might approach a feral creature with care and dignity. "Warm water," he said. "No herbs, just heat. Drink if you want. I almost cut you. You woke fighting ghosts. I could have opened your throat." His gaze held hers, steady and unsparing. "Then I would have deserved it for crowding you in your sleep." No male had ever answered her fear by accepting responsibility. The shock of it scraped her clean. She swallowed and reached for the cup, hands still shaking. Warmth spread through her palms first, then her chest. Dante waited until she had drunk half before he asked, "Permission to check your shoulder? You hit stone when you came up." She blinked at him. "You are asking me?" "Yes." The word struck harder than any shout. Arabella nodded once. He moved close enough to rest 2 fingertips near the bruise darkening beneath her collarbone, pressure light and brief. "No break," he said. "You will hate me tomorrow anyway." The absurdity caught her off guard. "I already do." Excellent. Predictable terrain. That pulled another short breath of almost laughter from her, thin but real, and for a moment the room felt less like a siege. Thunder shook dust from the rafters. Era stirred and began a fretful cry. Arabella started forward, but Dante was already there, not taking the child away, only lifting her long enough for Arabella to settle against the wall with her knees raised. He passed Era into her arms and tucked the blanket around both, efficient and reverent. When the child's fussing eased, he stood, looked around the room, and then dragged an old shield plank from beneath a collapsed bench. "What are you doing?" Arabella whispered, failing to ignore obvious problems. He set tools beside the plank. Awl, short saw, leather strips salvaged from ruined straps. "That sling has no rigid base. You have been sleeping with one arm under her to keep her from rolling. You need a cradle. In a war ruin. In a war ruin built by practical people." He glanced up. "Do not mistake rough materials for rough intentions." He worked through the storm hours with the concentration of a man mending his own ribcage. Saw strokes timed to thunder. Leather pulled through drilled holes and knotted tight. Splinter edges sanded with a whetstone until smooth enough for infant skin. At intervals, he hummed under his breath, low and resonant, an old battle chant turned gentle by repetition. Arabella recognized none of the words, but the cadence steadied Era faster than rocking did. At one point she asked, "Why that song?" His hands paused on the cradle frame. "My mother used it before sieges. Said if warriors can breathe to one rhythm, fear has less room." He resumed tightening a knot. "I never expected to sing it for a child." Arabella watched him in firelight, the scar on his cheek catching bronze and shadow. Legends had painted Dante Stoneheart as ruthless, exiled, half-feral with old blood feuds. No legend had mentioned this. A king-sized fighter sanding shieldwood so no splinter would touch a fevered infant, humming as if tenderness were a discipline he had trained like combat. Near dawn, rain thinned to a fine hiss. Era slept at last in the finished cradle, wrapped in dry wool above a bed of warmed sandstones. Dante sat on the floor with his back against the wall, forearms resting on bent knees, eyes half closed but alert. Arabella remained opposite him, too tired to pretend she was not watching. The bond between them settled into a constant quiet pressure. Less blaze than ember now, present in every shared silence. She could endure that. Maybe. Gray light had barely reached the arrow slits when hoofbeats sounded in the outer yard. The cropped hair guard appeared in the doorway. Corin returned. Also 2 traders from the neutral ring. They brought salt and grain. They say Ash Moon devotees hold the ring this morning and are asking after a silver-eyed pup. Dante stood in one fluid movement. The softness left his posture, replaced by command like a blade sliding free. How many devotees? 6 visible, more nearby. He looked at Arabella. We need supplies and witnesses. If Zephyr is testing control of the ring, silence helps him. We go together. Every instinct screamed to hide. Yet hiding had already led cult riders to her door. Arabella looked at Era in the cradle, then back at Dante. If this is a trap, I do not run with her in open ground again. Agreed. He crossed to a chest, drew out a heavy cloak lined with rabbit fur, and held it out. You walk beside me by your own will. If you tell me stop, we stop. If you tell me fight, we fight. If you tell me leave, I clear you a path, and we leave. Trade-offs. Choices. Not orders disguised as protection. She took the cloak. The neutral trading ring sat where 3 territories touched, a broad circle of trampled earth around an ancient standing stone carved with old pack sigils. Canvas stalls ringed the clearing. Smoked fish, tallow, herbs, forged nails, dyed wool. Today, half the table stood empty. Wolves clustered at the edges in wary knots, watching a group in ash-dyed cloaks occupy the central stone as if it were a pulpit. When Arabella stepped into view with Era bundled at her chest, whispers flared and spread. One devotee, thin-faced and sharp-eyed, pointed openly. There, the discarded mate flesh? Laughter followed, brittle and eager. Bring the child for inspection. We verify prophecy marks by decree. Arabella's spine went rigid. Awareness prickled along it like static before lightning. She shifted her stance, one hand under Era's blanket, fingers finding the knife hilt. Dante moved once and took the space between Arabella and the devotees, with terrifying calm. He did not touch her. He did not reach back to claim her position. He simply occupied the line of threat and held it. Name your authority, he said. The thin-faced male lifted a tablet shard stamped with black wax. Ash Moon Purification Writ, by Zephyr Shadowfang, Regent of Spiritual Law. Forgery does not become law because you read it loudly. Murmurs swept the ring. Dante's voice dropped into ceremony cadence, each word precise enough to cut. Under Border Compact, Fang Clause 9 and Hearth Clause 3, any mother and unweaned pup under immediate threat may enter Alpha Blood Oath custody upon witness and declared consent. Harm, seizure, and inspection without consent are crimes against pack law. He turned his head, just enough for Arabella to hear. Do you consent to my oath protection in this ring, Arabella Duskwalker? Every gaze in the market pinned her. Old shame rose, expecting to be swallowed again by public judgment. She looked at the standing stone, at traders who had seen too much coercion to pretend neutrality was safety, at Era's sleeping face. Then she answered clearly. I consent to protection of my person and my child. I do not consent to transfer, inspection, or doctrine claim. Dante faced forward again. Witnessed. One of Zephyr's enforcers spat at the dirt. You hide behind legal scraps because you know what that thing is. He stepped closer, hand dropping to his blade. Move, exile, the regent ordered the pup. Dante drew his sword halfway. No flourish, no roar. Just steel and certainty and the sharp quiet that falls before impact. Gold runes lit faintly along his forearm beneath the leather bracer, old oath marks answering old law. His tone stayed low enough that everyone had to lean in to catch it. No one touches what stands behind me. The sentence landed with the weight of a gate bar dropping into place. Even the wind seemed to pause. Arabella felt the meaning of it settle through her bones. Not mine. Not owed. Not owned. Behind me because you chose that ground, and I will hold it until you choose otherwise. The enforcer tested 2 more steps. Dante matched one, blade angle shifting to close the path with effortless economy. Predator met predator, but only one of them looked governed by something larger than appetite. Around the ring, other wolves began to move, subtle at first. A fishmonger set down his knife and came to stand by the standing stone. 2 shepherd sisters took positions near Arabella's flank, staffs planted. Corin appeared at Dante's left, with hand near hilt and eyes like winter. The thin-faced devotee glanced around and recalculated. This is not over, he hissed. Eclipse law will settle what market noise cannot. Bring real law when you come, Dante said, or bring enough fire to confess your intent openly. The devotees withdrew in a tight cluster, ash cloaks snapping in the morning wind. No one cheered. The ring exhaled in scattered movement as trade resumed by degrees, tension lingering like smoke after a near strike. Arabella stood very still until her knees remembered how to lock. Dante sheathed his blade and turned toward her, gaze searching her face for signs of collapse. He did not mention aloud. You are shaking, he said quietly. I noticed. You stayed. I noticed that too. For a moment neither spoke. Then, slowly, Arabella shifted Era from one arm to the other and held out the supply satchel she had kept clutched to her side during the confrontation. Dante reached for it, and this time, when their fingers met, she did not pull away. The bond answered with a warm, steady pulse, not demand, but recognition. Her guard did not fall. It lowered by a single measured notch, like a gate opened just wide enough to admit one trusted wolf at a time. Her guard did not fall. It lowered by a single measured notch, like a gate opened just wide enough to admit one trusted wolf at a time. Dante took the satchel from her hand, and the contact lingered one breath longer than necessity. Then Corin appeared at his shoulder with a wrapped bundle of oilcloth and a look that had gone hard around the edges. From the Ash Cloak's pack mule, Corin said. They dropped it when they pulled back. Dante's mouth flattened. Open it. Corin unwrapped 3 stone tablets thin as slate, each etched with lunar script and sealed in black wax bearing Zephyr Shadowfang's split crescent. Even before Dante passed one to her, Arabella knew the etching was wrong. Lunar law flowed in curved grammar, breath marks, and lineage knots designed to be read aloud in ritual cadence. These lines were jagged, cut fast, as if someone had copied the shape of holiness without understanding its spine. She read anyway. By Eclipse authority and Ash Moon witness, the child born of sundered vow shall be declared aberrant vessel. Maternal custody suspended under purity doctrine. Transfer to fortress guardians required for spiritual correction. Refusal constitutes rebellion against divine hierarchy. Below it, an added decree in harsher hand. Any sanctuary that harbors the mother known as Arabella Duskwalker forfeits protection and may be cleansed by fire. The market sounds thinned to a distant hum. Arabella's vision narrowed to carved letters and wax. He is not trying to take one child, she said, voice scraping. He is rewriting custody law. Dante gave a single grim nod. And doing it with scripture language so frightened Pax obey before they verify. He lifted another tablet and traced a line with his thumb. He copied old Eclipse clauses, then replaced kinship terms with purity terms. Clever, in a rotten way. Corin spat into the dust. Some will not question it. They already bend knee to him for blessing rites. A fishmonger who had stepped closer swallowed hard. My sister's village gave bread to a dark-haired woman last month. If ash cloaks come with these tablets, they will claim legal right. Arabella folded her arms around Era, who slept with her cheek warm against wool. Shame and anger rose together, two old enemies forced into alliance. She knew exactly how Zephyr's doctrine worked because she had lived its smaller version under Rourke. Take a woman standing, call it tradition, then name any refusal rebellion. The method was always the same, only scale changed. Dante looked over the ring, measuring faces, calculating fault lines. "Hear me," he said, pitched for the whole clearing. "These tablets are forged." A trader called back, "Can you prove it before moonfall?" "That is what he counts on," Corin muttered. Arabella stared at the etched lies and felt a hard, lucid calm settle where panic had been. Zephyr was dangerous because he understood hunger better than honor. He offered frightened wolves a hierarchy simple enough to obey, pure above impure, sanctioned above cast out, doctrine above consent. It promised certainty in a season of scattered loyalties. Wolves would follow certainty, even cruel certainty, if the alternative looked like chaos. Dante read the room the same way. "Corin," he said, "ride to every stall line and carry witness statements. Names, sigils, what was said here. Mara escorts." The cropped hair guard stepped from the crowd, already pulling cord and wax from her belt. "On it." Dante turned back to Arabella. "We go to the outpost now, no broad roads." "You think he will escalate today? I think he already has." He held up the last tablet. "This one summons wavering alphas to eclipse assembly at the old quarry amphitheater. Purification demonstration." His words, "He intends spectacle." Arabella's throat tightened. "He wants an audience when he takes her." "His aim is to crown himself regent while doing it," Dante said. "If he can seize you under a false right, every mother in disputed territory becomes precedent." The fishmonger bowed his head, not to Dante, but toward Arabella. "My cart path skirts 2 sanctuary hamlets. I can carry warning faster than riders in armor." Arabella met his eyes, startled by the gesture, then nodded. "Tell them not to stand in open lanes. Keep children in stone cellars. Bar wells and grain first." Dante glanced at her, approval flickering through fatigue. "You are already thinking like command." "I am thinking like prey that survived too long." She shifted Era higher and lifted her chin. "Move. If we are going to break Zephyr's lie, we do it before he nails it to every boundary stone." They left the ring under watchful silence, flanked by Corin and Mara until the trail split. The sky had gone the color of hammered steel, clouds layered low enough to press scent toward earth. Pines crowded the path, dripping from morning rain, each needle exhaling resin and cold. As soon as the ring sounds faded, the bond between her and Dante sharpened again, not as a flare, but as a constant line of awareness. She knew the moment his jaw set, the instant his attention snapped to distant hoofbeats, the half-second before he glanced back to check her footing. The intimacy of that wordless map unsettled her more than any shouted threat. "I am walking beside a male built for command," she thought, present tense and painfully clear, and my body keeps reading him as shelter. That has ruined women before me. Shelter becomes ownership. Protection becomes leverage. I know this pattern. I have scars from it. Yet each time he asks permission instead of taking, another brick loosens in a wall I spent years mortaring shut. I do not know where to put this new equation. Power with restraint, hunger with discipline, law spoken as shield instead of chain. If I lean into it and I am wrong, I lose more than pride. If I refuse it and I am wrong, I may lose the only ally strong enough to stop what is coming. Dante slowed so she could step over a washout where roots curled like knuckles from the bank. He did not offer his hand until she looked up. Rock is slick ahead. She considered the gap, then him, then placed her palm in his. Warm, calloused, steady. He guided her across and released immediately on the far side. "Thank you," she said. His mouth shifted. "You can accuse me again in 10 steps if balance is restored." 12 steps later, she said, deadpan. "Your trail pacing is insufferable." "Good. You are less frightened when you are annoyed." The sound that left her was almost a laugh, brief as a wing beat, but it made something ease in his shoulders. By the time they reached the outpost, riders had already come and gone. Fresh ash sigils painted in black slurry marked the outer stones, split crescents over crossed claws. A message had been pinned under a dagger at the gate. Dante yanked it free and read aloud. "Arabella Duskwalker to present herself and the aberrant child at Eclipse Assembly. Failure to comply initiates cleansing of sanctuary villages by first flame. Witness and obey." Below the script, Zephyr's personal seal had been pressed so hard it cracked the wax. Mara cursed softly. Corin, just returned from his circuit, came in hot, with foam on his horse's chest. 3 hamlets report riders counting doorways and granaries. No strike yet. Just marking. "Not yet," Arabella said, and hated how steady her voice sounded. "He intends to let fear ripen before he burns anything." Dante crumpled the message in one hand. "We move people now." For the next hours, the outpost became command in motion. Maps were weighted flat with daggers. Couriers rotated in and out. Corin routed shepherd families through creek beds to a limestone cave network. Mara organized wagon screens to hide evacuation from ridge watchers. Dante dispatched small teams, never more than 4, to avoid giving Zephyr a clear battle line. Arabella should have sat by the hearth and held Era. No one would have blamed her. Instead, she stood at the map table with the child bound snug against her chest and marked supply routes from memory, which bridges groaned under wagon weight, where briar thickets could hide 20 people, which mills kept dry flour in false floors. Wolves listened when she spoke, not because of old title, because her details saved time, and time had become the rarest currency in the territory. Just after dusk bled into the first ash of evening, 2 sanctuary stewards arrived with soot on their cloaks and terror in their eyes. "They burned the watchtower at Hollow Birch," one said, breath ragged. "No dead. We pulled everyone out. They left this in the embers." He handed over a charred strip of hide stamped with Zephyr's sigil and one line of script. "First flame is mercy. Second flame is judgment." Arabella went cold from scalp to heel, not because of the threat itself, but because of its precision. Zephyr had chosen an empty tower first to prove capacity without spending full force. He was teaching the territory his rhythm. Comply now, or watch escalation mapped step by step. Dante dismissed the stewards with food and guard escort. When the room cleared, he braced both hands on the map table and closed his eyes once. "He is pushing you toward one choice. Present myself. So he can stage legality." She rocked Era lightly, feeling the child's sleepy breath against her skin. "If villages burn while I hide here, I become his argument." Dante looked up, amber brightening under low lamplight. "If you walk into his circle unprepared, you become his captive argument." Silence stretched, taut with trade-offs neither of them could soften. Outside, wind moved through ruined battlements with a hollow note like distant horns. Corin re-entered carrying a narrow chest banded in iron. "From Cache 3, he said. "You said to bring it if the tablets appeared." Dante unlocked the chest and lifted out wrapped bundles of moonstone sheets, older than any market law, their surface veined with pale light. "Archive fragments, authentic script." Arabella stared. "You had these the whole time?" "I took them when the council started redacting maternal clauses 5 years ago," he said. That is why I was exiled, officially for insubordination, actually for refusing to burn records. Something inside her went very still. The ruthless legend, the exile, the hidden outpost, the careful law language at the ring. Pieces aligned into one severe, startling truth. He had not fallen from power by accident. He had stepped out rather than sanctify theft. Dante touched the edge of one moonstone page as if it were bone from a beloved dead. Zephyr cannot sustain forged doctrine if we read these before full assembly. Real archive supersedes any private writ. Arabella's pulse quickened. Then we do not wait for him to define the eclipse. We bring the archive ourselves. Too dangerous, Corin said. Everything is dangerous, she answered. The question is whose script governs the danger. Night settled fully by the time the runners departed with evacuation orders. Exhaustion hit in jagged waves once action thinned, and Dante finally insisted she rest while Mara took first watch. Arabella refused the barracks and chose the old signal room above the gate where narrow windows face the valley. Dante followed with a lamp and a folded blanket, then set both down without stepping inside her reach. Era woke hungry. Arabella fed her in the quiet half-dark while the lamp hissed and wind pressed cold at the stones. Dante stood at the window, back turned in deliberate courtesy, shoulders broad enough to block the draft. "Stay," she said before she could reconsider. He turned slowly. "Are you sure?" "No crowds, no council, no law recitals, just stay." He sat on the floor opposite her, knees bent, hands loose over them, giving space yet remaining present in that grounded way she had begun to trust. For a long while they listened to Era's small swallows and the far cry of night birds. Finally, Arabella said, "When Rourke rejected me, I kept waiting for someone to shout stop. An elder, a cousin, anyone. No one did. I told myself that meant they agreed I was worth less." Her voice thinned, but she held it steady. "I built my survival around that math. Ask less, need less, expect betrayal early so it hurts less when it comes." Dante absorbed the words without interruption. After a beat, he answered, "When the council ordered archive burnings, I stood in the hall and asked who signed the redactions. No one met my eyes. They voted anyway. I left with what records I could carry because if I stayed, I would become useful to their lie." He looked at his hands, then back at her. "Exile taught me to command from distance. Keep everyone alive. Need no one. It is efficient. Also barren." The honesty in that last word undid her more than comfort would have. She shifted Era to her shoulder and, once the child slept again, crossed the small space between them. She did not climb into his arms. She sat beside him with her back to the wall so their shoulders touched through wool and leather. Light contact, steady as a promise not yet spoken. The bond warmed, a gold thread sensation across her sternum and out through her limbs, not consuming, not forcing, simply aligning two wounded rhythms until they made one quieter beat. Dante exhaled as if he had been holding breath for years. "Arabella," he said, roughened by restraint, "if you choose me never, I will still keep you and Era under oath until this ends." She turned her face toward him, close enough to see the pale line of the scar crossing his cheek. "And if I choose you later?" His gaze held hers, fierce and careful at once. "Then it will be by your will, in witness. No coercion, no haste." She touched the old crescent scar at his ribs through cloth, fingertips light, and felt warmth answer under her hand. "Then we survive first," she whispered. "Everything else after." A horn blast split the night. One note, then two, urgent and rising from the south ridge. Dante was moving before the echo died, on his feet, sword belt already in hand. Mara shouted from the stairwell, "Riders at Hollow Birch Road, ash torches. They are driving families toward the open cut." Arabella stood with Era secured to her chest, blood gone icy. How many families? 3 wagons. Maybe more. Corin barreled into the signal room, rain on his lashes. Scouts report Zephyr himself at the quarry amphitheater with Eclipse pyre raised. He sent strike teams to herd villages toward the road as leverage. Message says if Arabella does not present by moonrise, second flame starts. Dante strapped on his sword, eyes gone feral bright with contained fury. He is forcing simultaneous choices, rescue line or ritual intercept. He intends a split. Outside, the southern horizon pulsed orange through trees, not full wildfire, but controlled burns set as warning lines. Smoke rolled low into the valley, carrying pitch and fear. Bells began to ring from distant hamlets, uneven and frantic. Arabella looked from the window to her daughter, then to Dante. The crux hit with brutal clarity. If they committed all force to village extraction, Zephyr would stage Eclipse legitimacy unchallenged. If they marched straight to the amphitheater, families on the road would be trapped between riders and fire lines. Either path alone gave him victory. She tightened her hold on Era until the child made a soft protesting sound, then eased her grip at once. When she spoke, her voice did not shake. "We do both." Corin stared. "With what numbers?" "With strategy, not pride," Arabella said. "Mara takes fast teams through creek gullies to pull families into limestone caves. No direct clash unless necessary. Dante and I go to the amphitheater with the archive and a witness guard, force public reading before full moonline. Zephyr built this on spectacle. We break him in front of the same eyes he came to own." Dante's gaze locked on hers, measuring the cost she was accepting. "If we go, he will try to seize you. He already has, in script." She lifted her chin. "I am done being stolen on paper." Another horn blast sounded, closer now. From the courtyard came the clatter of harness, shouted orders, the metallic ring of gates being thrown wide. The crisis had moved from threat to motion. There was no more room for hesitation. Dante stepped in, close enough that heat from his body cut the cold smoke air. "By your will." "By my will," Arabella answered. He touched 2 fingers to her wrist, an oath contact, brief and binding. "Then we ride into Eclipse." And below them, in the valley dark, the second line of fire ignited. Smoke rolled across the courtyard in low gray bands as riders split at Dante's signal. Mara taking the eastern gully teams while Corin hauled the heavy moonstone chest onto a saddle frame reinforced with iron straps. Arabella wrapped Era against her chest in 2 layers of wool and 1 oilskin, then tied the final knot with fingers that had gone steady in the worst way, beyond panic and into purpose. Dante mounted beside her, gave a sharp nod to the gate crew, and the outpost emptied into the burning dark. The route to the quarry amphitheater cut through old logging roads where stumps rose like broken teeth, and sparks drifted down from ridge fires set as pressure lines. Behind them, horns marked Mara's extraction teams moving families toward limestone caves. Ahead, a different sound gathered by degrees, a chant pulsing in disciplined waves, dozens of voices working the same 3-note cadence Zephyr's riders used at the border. Ritual rhythm. Audience rhythm. By the time they reached the quarry rim, the eclipse had bitten half the moon away. The amphitheater lay in a vast stone bowl carved by generations of blasting and weather. Terraces stepped in concentric arcs around a central altar platform of black basalt. Torches ringed every tier. Pack banners snapped in wind from at least 9 territories, some familiar, some neutral, some once loyal to councils now splintering under fear. At the center stood Zephyr Shadowfang in ash-black ceremonial leather, obsidian braids threaded with silver hooks, one hand lifted as if he conducted the entire valley by tendon and will. Behind him rose a pyre scaffold stacked with resinwood and oath scroll bundles, symbolic fire prepared for legal theater. Not one part of this had been improvised. Zephyr saw them as they descended the western ramp and smiled as if greeting honored guests at a feast. Arabella Duskwalker arrives of her own feet, he called, voice amplified by carved stone. The goddess still favors order. Dante dismounted first and offered Arabella his hand. She took it, stepped down, and kept walking until she stood within full view of every terrace. Era secure in her arms, moonstone chest carried behind by Corin and two guards. Murmurs spread. Some wolves looked away from her face and fixed on the child. Others stared openly, searching for signs they had been trained to fear. Zephyr's gaze settled on Era and sharpened. Bring the vessel to the altar, kneel, and this remains ceremonial. Arabella answered without lowering her head. You forged doctrine, threatened sanctuary villages, and called theft sacred. We came to read law, not kneel to counterfeit. A ripple moved through the crowd. Not agreement yet, but fracture. Zephyr laughed once, soft and contemptuous. Law lives where power ratifies it. You stand with an exile and a sickly infant and speak of authority. Dante's hand rested on his sword hilt, still sheathed. Read your writ in full assembly and accept challenge by archive precedents if you believe your script can endure witness. Zephyr did not look at him. Exiles do not petition. They beg. He snapped two fingers. Ash-cloaked enforcers moved from the side aisles, fanning out to hem the altar circle, blades visible, posture ritual clean but combat ready. On the upper terraces, torchbearers lowered flame tips toward the pyre ropes as a threat display to every watching pack. Obey the right, or burn with the heretics. This was the move Dante had predicted. Coercion wrapped in ceremony. Zephyr opened a black wax tablet and began reciting in a priestly cadence, invoking eclipse clauses, purity inheritance, spiritual regency. Each line twisted old legal terms into hierarchy and seizure. Arabella listened and felt the old wedding night pressure return for one suspended instant, the crowd waiting to see if she would fold, if silence would devour her again in public. Not this time. When Zephyr reached the line naming Era an aberrant vessel subject to transfer, Arabella stepped forward into the central ring and cut him off with one clear word. False. The amphitheater stilled. Zephyr's smile thinned. You interrupt consecrated reading. I challenge under moonstone precedents and maternal line clause. She turned to the terraces and projected her voice the way healers did across storm camps, from diaphragm to stone. Witness challenge. A few voices answered uncertainly. Then more, then enough to register. Witness. Corin dropped to one knee, opened the chest and lifted the first authentic archive slab into moonlight. The stone itself held pale veins that lit when touched by bloodline heirs. Arabella took it, raised it high, and the script glimmered silver across its face. Zephyr's composure cracked by a hair. Stolen relics prove nothing. They prove everything if read. Arabella handed Era to Mara, who had arrived through the side passage with soot on her cloak and 3 cave team fighters at her back. Mara tucked the child against her chest and moved to a guarded recess behind shield bearers, well outside the altar crush. Only then did Arabella draw her knife. Zephyr's enforcers surged half a step, reading steel as attack. Dante unsheathed in one smooth line and took position at Arabella's flank, blade low and ready, warning in every muscle. Arabella sliced her own palm, sharp, controlled. Pain flared bright, then settled into heat. She pressed her blood against the central altar rune, a sigil so old most wolves treated it as decoration. The blood soaked into the carved groove and vanished. For one breath, nothing. Then the entire ring answered. Silver fire erupted from the rune channels in branching arcs, racing outward along dormant grooves cut through the amphitheater floor. Not ordinary flame, but ward fire, cold, bright, and deliberate, rising in waist-high curtains around every terrace edge where families had clustered and every child sheltered in the back aisles. The blaze did not burn cloth or skin. It formed boundaries, luminous and unbroken, separating civilians from combat lanes in a geometry older than Zephyr's cult. Gasps broke from every side. Several Ashen Forcers grabbed their forearms, shouting as false oath marks branded there by cult rites began to smoke and peel away like brittle paint under rain. Arabella stood in the center with blood dripping from her hand and read from the archive in a voice that carried through the roar of silver flame. Maternal custody shall not be severed by doctrine claim. No child shall be tithed to altar, council, or crown. Sanctuary granted to mother and dependent shall be defended as hearthright under all moons. She turned one slab, then another, each clause landing like stone on rotten beams. Any writ that voids consent is void itself. Any oath secured by threat of village burning is oath corruption. Any regent claim made through forged script is treason against pack compact. On the terraces, wolves began checking their own tablets against her words. Confusion turned to anger in visible waves. A gray-furred alpha from the northern tier shouted, "My copy omits that clause." Another answered, "Mine too." An elder in blue war paint lifted his staff and bellowed, "Zephyr, answer challenge by source lineage." Zephyr dropped the priestly mask entirely. "Seize her," he snapped. No one moved fast enough, because the ward fire shifted at Arabella's raised hand and slammed into a full circle around the altar, forcing Zephyr's nearest enforcers backward in sparks and cursed breath. She had not known she could do that until the moment demanded it. The power tore through her like a river through cracked earth, immense and difficult to steer. Every heartbeat cost, every breath felt borrowed. Dante stepped closer, not touching, anchoring by presence. "Hold it," he said quietly, meant only for her. "You have it." Zephyr lunged at the barrier with a snarl, partial shift tearing through his face and hands, obsidian claws extending from his fingers as glamour stripped away. He looked less like a priest now, and more like a starving warlord draped in stolen scripture. "You think blood on stone makes you sovereign," he spat. "You were cast out because you are nothing." Arabella met his gaze across silver fire and answered, voice raw and steady at once. "I was cast out so I would stop asking permission to exist." The line hit the crowd harder than the flames had. Wolves who had stood neutral all night took one step forward, then another, toward her side of the ring. Zephyr roared and drove through a thinning point in the ward with brute force and cult sigil reinforcement. Claws aimed past Dante's guard lane toward the recess where Mara held Ira. He never reached it. Dante intercepted in a collision of steel, shoulder, and momentum that sent both males skidding across wet basalt. The fight went close and vicious. No grand flourishes, only trained brutality. Elbow strikes, hilt punches, knee checks, claws against tempered edge. Zephyr fought like a zealot who believed any wound was holy. Dante fought like a commander protecting a line that could not break. Arabella kept the ward fire standing while they clashed, arms shaking, vision pulsing at the edges. Zephyr's glamour marks across the amphitheater were unraveling under the archive burn, and each unravel felt like a hook pulling through her spine. If she dropped the barrier now, the crowd could collapse into panic and blades. If she held too long, she might fall where she stood. "Choose," she told herself, "not endurance for its own sake, precision." She grabbed the final moonstone slab from the chest and slammed its point against the altar socket where Zephyr had set his forged regent sigil. Stone met stone, with a ringing crack. Silver lines shot up the spear-like shard she had created by fracture, turning it into a jagged lance of light keyed to the true archive. Zephyr saw it and tried to break from Dante, but Dante locked him at the elbow and drove him backward with a growl that shook gravel from the altar seams. "Now, Arabella!" She moved inside the fight, heat and smoke and moonlight collapsing into one narrow lane. Zephyr twisted, claw slashing her sleeve but missing flesh, and bared his teeth at her like a curse made flesh. Arabella drove the moonstone spear straight into the forged sigil burned into the center of his chest. The sound was not a scream at first, but a deep implosion, as if air had been sucked from a cavern. Black gold glamour threads snapped outward from Zephyr's body, then burned away in silver sparks. His knees buckled. Dante used the momentum, slammed him down onto the altar slab, and pinned him with forearm and blade across the throat. Zephyr choked, still fighting for language. "You cannot kill doctrine." Dante's voice dropped to iron. "Your faith was hunger-wearing scripture." Arabella stood over them, blood on her palm, moonstone lance vibrating in her grip. Pack law required sentence from the aggrieved claimant in full witness when treason and child seizure rights had been proven. She looked to the terraces. "Witnesses," she called, "do you affirm forged doctrine, coercive writ, and attempted seizure under Eclipse Assembly?" Voices thundered back from every tier. "Affirmed." She faced Zephyr. "By compact law, by archive precedents, and by maternal claim defended in witness, I sentence Zephyr Shadowfang to dissolution of oath, rank, and form. Let false fire answer true." She pulled the spear free. Silver flame engulfed him from chest outward, bright enough to turn every face in the amphitheater stark and pale. There was no gore, only light-consuming glamour, title, and flesh together, until nothing remained on the basalt but ash shaped briefly like a split crescent, then scattered by wind. The ward fire around the terraces softened at once, lowering from walls to threads, then fading into lines of pale embers etched along stone. Silence held for 3 heartbeats. Then staff struck ground. One, then dozens. Pack acknowledgement, legal acceptance. Dante rose, chest heaving, blood at his brow from a shallow claw line, and turned to Arabella as if the rest of the world had narrowed to her and the child breathing safely behind shield-bearers. Corin crossed the ring to take custody of surviving cult enforcers who had dropped weapons and knelt, Mark stripped and hands shaking. Mara emerged from the recess with Era calm against her shoulder, silver eyes open in the eclipse light, watching. Cloud edge slipped from the moon. The shadow began to pass. Dante cleaned his blade on Zephyr's discarded cloak, sheathed it, and stepped into the center of the altar ring where all could see him. His voice carried without strain, stripped of command posturing and raw with deliberate vulnerability. "Arabella Duskwalker, by will and not fear, do you choose me?" He did not touch her. He did not close the final step. He waited. The waiting mattered as much as the question. Arabella felt every witness in the quarry, every old bruise of public judgment, every new line of law she had just carved into living memory. She looked at Dante's scarred face, at the blood drying at his temple, at the male who had set his sword down when she woke, afraid, and asked permission when others demanded obedience. The bond between them throbbed warm and clear, not as command, but as invitation. "Yes," she said, and the word came from her center without tremor. "By will, by witness, I choose you." A breath seemed to leave the entire amphitheater. Dante approached slowly until he stood within her reach. "May I mark you?" "Yes." He lifted one hand to cup her jaw, thumb rough and reverent against skin, then bent and placed his mouth at the junction of her neck and shoulder, where pulse leapt fast beneath bruised flesh. His fangs pierced with controlled pressure, sharp pain blooming bright enough to steal her breath, then transforming almost immediately into spreading heat that raced through her chest and down her spine in golden waves. Not domination. Recognition written into nerve and blood. She gripped his forearm, steadying herself as the bond opened wider. Threads of warm light spiraling from his sternum to hers, invisible strands that shimmered between them for an instant before sinking into skin. On the terraces, wolves held silence, as if standing in a temple. Dante released carefully, lips brushing the marked skin in apology and promise. His voice was rough. "Mine." Arabella met his eyes, saw the fierce wonder there, and placed both hands along his jaw. Yours. She guided him down by an inch and bared her own teeth at his throat mark, the place where his pulse hammered under battle-warm skin. May I? His answer came like a vow. Always. She bit. His body went rigid under her hands as pain struck, then softened into a shuddering exhale when the bond completed its mirrored circuit. Heat flared through her again, deeper this time, carrying scents and impressions, cedar and storm rain, iron discipline, grief banked for years, devotion rising like dawn behind mountains. In return, she felt him receive her own currents, root-deep stubbornness, scar memory, fierce protectiveness, the tender ache of loving Era with her whole terrified heart. Nothing hidden, nothing taken without consent. Shared. Mate, Dante whispered against her forehead. Mate, she answered. They rested there, foreheads touching, breaths sinking while gold threads settled from blazing arcs into a calm inner weave that pulsed with each heartbeat. Around them, the wolves who had come to witness seizure watched a different rite complete, one built on choice rather than fear. Arabella pulled back just enough to look at him fully. No exile, no surrender. Home. Dante's mouth curved with exhausted relief and awe. No exile, no surrender. Home. He drew her into his arms then, careful of her fresh mark and the child bundle Mara was already carrying toward them, and held her like a male who understood the difference between possession and shelter. Arabella let herself lean, not because she had nowhere else to stand, but because she had chosen this ground. When Mara placed Era between them, the infant blinked up at both with moonbright irises and grabbed Dante's finger in her tiny fist. Dante laughed once under his breath, wrecked and reverent. She outranks us both already. Finally, a lawful ruler, Mara murmured, and the nearest guards huffed startled laughter that broke the tension without diminishing the moment. Before dawn, they convened tribunal by torch and moonstone in the same amphitheater Zephyr had meant to use as a throne. Alphas from each present territory stood in a half-circle, while Corin read witness statements from the Ring, the Burn Tower, and the Eclipse Assembly. Authentic archive clauses were recited and copied by 3 independent scribes to prevent future redaction. Surviving Ash enforcers testified to forged tablets, coercive branding, and planned village cleansings in exchange for clemency under oath labor. Rulings were struck into stone before sunrise. Zephyr's doctrine was nullified in full across allied pacts. Sanctuary villages were placed under royal protection patrols, funded by shared grain levies and guarded by rotating mixed pack units, so no single alpha could weaponize access. Child seizure rights, purity inspections, and involuntary transfer claims were outlawed by compact amendment, violation punishable by rank stripping and territorial ban. Then the elder of the northern tier, voice formal and resonant, called Arabella to the central platform. Arabella Duskwalker, he said, you challenged forged law in witness, restored archive precedents, defended sanctuary right, and held maternal line ward magic under Eclipse trial. Do you accept installation as High Luna of Stoneheart territories and Keeper of the Moon archives? Arabella looked at Dante first. He gave no answer for her, only opened his hand. She stepped into the circle with Era in her arms, Mark fresh at her shoulder, and said, I accept, with this condition. Archive access will not be restricted to councils. Healers, stewards, and sanctuary heads read by right. A beat of surprise, then nods, then spoken assent rolling around the ring. Recorded, Corin said, carving the condition into wet wax for stone transfer. Mara knelt first when the formal mantle was placed over Arabella's shoulders, not as submission to cruelty, but as acknowledgement of chosen authority. Others followed, one row at a time, until the quarry floor mirrored a new hierarchy built in public and bound to written law. By mid-morning, runners carried sealed copies of the rulings to every boundary stone from the fringe woods to the mountain passes. By evening, the first sanctuary convoy reached the Fortress Valley Court Dante had kept hidden in exile, now opened by decree. Gates that had once admitted only fugitives widened to receive families, craftsmen, healers, and wolves, who had been told for years that belonging required silence. In the great hall, stripped of old tyrant banners and rehung with neutral mooncloth, Arabella stood beside Dante while children from Hollow Birch chased each other between long tables, and no one moved to hush them for taking up space. Corin accepted command of border law patrols with visible disbelief and stern pride. Mara took oath as captain of Sanctuary Guard and promptly began arguing for better roof drainage over the nursery wing, which Dante accepted without pretense of winning. When night settled and the hall quieted, Arabella carried Era to the private chamber overlooking the valley orchards. Dante followed with a basin of warm water and archive tablets stacked under one arm, because even Triumph required paperwork, and both of them trusted documents more than celebrations. They cleaned ash from their hands, checked the fresh marks at shoulder and throat, and watched the bond glow faintly along their skin before sinking into a settled warmth that felt like a hearth finely built where storms could not uproot it. Dawn came pale gold over the valley walls. Arabella woke to soft weight against her side and found Era asleep between her and Dante. One tiny hand fisted in the blanket that covered all three. Outside, bells rang the first open court morning. Not alarm this time, but invitation. Petitioners already gathered below. A widow requesting grain rights, 2 young wolves seeking sanctuary transfer, a healer asking archive copies for training. She listened to their voices drift upward with birdsong and wood smoke, and for the first time since wedding fire turned to exile, the sound of a territory waking did not feel like threat. Dante opened his eyes, still rough with sleep, and looked from Arabella to their daughter to the light spreading across stone. He touched the mark at her shoulder with reverent fingertips, then brushed Era's hair back from her brow. "Home," he said quietly. Arabella kissed his temple, then Era's small knuckles, and answered with the certainty she had fought for in blood and law and witness. "Home."